Welcome to Fire Engineering's Training Minutes. My name is Mark Gregory. Today we're going to do a evolution, man and machinery. What we have here is a commonplace worker. We'll give the situation here is a guy at a meat market, is doing his everyday job. All of a sudden, not paying attention, his hand gets stuck in this meat grinder. What we've used for the training purposes today is we're using a manual meat grinder, all right? In the real world, I figure this is going to be an electric machine. The first thing we have to think about as we pull up is scene safety, lockout, tagout. We need to isolate the power to this machine. Shutting off the switch just won't do it. If we can kill the breaker, if we can pull the plug to the machine, we want to make sure the power does not accidentally get turned on as we're operating. We've got the hand caught here. We go past our scene stabilization. We want to go on to victim care. We need to support this victim. Remember that they're going to be in shock. What we use to simulate the victim's hand is simply pig's feet. The purpose behind the pig's feet is actually the bone in it, very similar to a human hand. Also, as we're cutting later on, you'll smell that if we're not using a proper cooling agent, you'll actually smell the flesh burning, which gives the realism to the rescuer of the harm that we could be doing to our patient. Scene stabilization, what can we do for the victim? All right, if Pat was the victim here and he was standing here, we could have an EMS, put a backboard behind him, stabilize. Remember, this victim's going to be in shock. Possibly distract the victim if we can. Get them facing in another direction so that we can do our work. We've also added in here, we put ketchup. The reason behind the ketchup is, again, realism. We want to make this drill as real as possible. Body protection for the rescuers is going to be key. We've got our EMS gloves on underneath our work gloves. Pat's got the shield. You may want to think about wearing some sort of an EMS gown because you'll see as we start cutting, you're going to have fluids flying around. We have to think about how are we going to make our cuts? How are we going to take this machine apart? We've got the right angle grinder, which is going to be Pat's tool of choice. And what we want to do is we're going to make 4 cuts. 1 cut straight down from the top of the housing and 1 cut across. We're going to replicate those same cuts on the opposite side. Anything that we could take off to make the cut easier, all right, we could do. We could take this all apart. Now, as Pat's cutting, he's got to think about the victim's hand. He's got to think about causing any further injury to the victim. Some simple things that you can keep in your toolbox. A hacksaw blade will work pretty well. You can bend it, we can form it, and what we could do is actually slide it in and work around the victim to keep the blade of the saw from actually cutting. We also have what we were using in earlier presentations, our spoons. We can flatten the spoon out and we can get the spoon in here. We're also going to need a cooling agent. As Pat's cutting, I'm going to need to cool the cut that he's creating. So simple use of the water will help us out. Have additional water standing by, have an additional 2.5 gallon water can. Any source is good. Pat, we'll have Pat make the first cut over here. We're holding stabilization on the victim. Pat's going to come and make the cut. Let me just get, all right. I can hold the guy's hand away. Okay. Stop. Stop. Okay. The reason I stopped Pat, just to show, as you're teaching here, the heat. There's minimal heat. The reason being is the cooling effect. All right? We need to make sure that we have water on this at all time because we don't want to cause any further injury. We don't want to burn the victim. Pat, go ahead. You can continue. You notice minimum sparking. Hold on 1 second, Pat. Okay, continue cutting. As you can see the amount of fluid that you have, you got to remember that you're going to get fluid from the victim itself, plus you're getting the water. I'm going to stop using the water right now, and the reason I stopped is to demonstrate to your rescuers, you can smell already the burning flesh from the pig. You'll also see the burn marks when you pull the pig out later. Our tool of choice is the right angle grinder. As you can see, your cuts, right? You get a pretty deep cut, and it takes a shorter amount of time. Excuse me one second, Pat. We've used the whizzer saw before, and you'll find with the whizzer saw that as you're cutting, all right, takes a little longer to cut, and the big problem that we have to think about with using a whizzer saw is we have to make sure that we have a constant air source. In the industrial world, we're going to have electric power. We also have generators if need be, but using the whizzer saw, we've got to think about having an air cart, or we have to make sure that we have extra cylinders available so that we can constantly keep this tool powered. All right, so in the essence of saving time, we already made the back cuts on the other side of the machine. So what you got to remember is this: it's going to be a total of 4 cuts. 1 cut down, 1 cut across, and again on the back end, 1 cut down, 1 cut across. That way we can take the whole upper housing completely off in order to get the hand out. Pat's going to finish this cut up in a second, but to emphasize again, as we're using a shim, in this case, using a hacksaw blade, all right, I'm able to bend it and move it, get it into position. We also have to think that when Pat's making the cut cross, we want to be able to shim from here. So by removing the housing of the machinery and getting it out of the way, I'm able now to bring my shim in so that I can protect the patient as Pat's cutting. If any part of their hand is caught in the auger, I'm able to protect the patient at this point in time. Pat, you want to finish your cut? Okay. Pat's through. All right. Again, we're holding stabilization on our patient. I can now remove the top portion. You can see the realism here of how the pig's foot looks just like a human hand and how it's caught around the auger. We need to think about transporting this patient now to the hospital. Right? Simply pulling their hand out of the machine doesn't do them any good at this point in time. We want to try to take the whole auger assembly if possible. That way the doctors have something to work with. In order to do that, I'm going to release the mechanism off the rear. I have my EMS personnel, my other firefighters holding stabilization, and what we're going to do is basically push the auger mechanism up and out forward. And we can transport such as this. That gives the doctors, as you can see, all right, the hand wrapped around the auger blade itself, so it gives the doctors something to work with, and hopefully they can reattach it and help the patient out. Biggest thing you look at here, the training purposes, you notice there's no cuts into the pig itself, right, into the pig's foot, which is key. It shows the rescuers how deep you're actually going into the grooves, and that's what we want to do. Also, burns. The black that you see on here was created from the smoke and was created from the water that was being used to cool. There's no burn at all to the skin. So that's a key point that we want to bring out when we do this evolution, is you have to think of the patient, right? They're going to have a lot of open nerve endings here, so the least amount of pain that we can cause to them, the better off that we are. Thanks for watching Training Minutes. I'm Mark Gregory.